All right. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you join us on this Wednesday morning for this virtual event, Capturing Bestiarium, the Art and Science of Digitization. My name is Ann Blecksmith, and I'm the head of Reader Services at the Huntington. This event is part of the library's ongoing webinar series, the Multi-Storied Library, produced by the Reader Services Department. I should mention that this presentation is being recorded. All attendees should receive an email with links to access the recorded presentation along with a survey link. Attendees are welcome to post questions at any time in the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Today, the Digital Library team will present a full access overview of the process of digitizing the illustrated 15th century bestiary, Dialogus Creaturarum, ascribed to Nicolaus Pergamenus and the Milanese doctor Mayno de Mayneriis. Their presentations will cover a lot of ground this hour, including content, description, the imaging process, and discovery. Without giving too much away, the presentation touches on the real and the mythical, and although it does not impart any moral lessons, you will learn about the high professional standards that guide digitization work. I'm happy to introduce our four talented presenters. Dr. Joel A. Klein is the Molina Curator for the History of Medicine and Allied Sciences. Prior to coming to the Huntington, Dr. Klein earned his PhD from Indiana University and had postdoctoral fellowships at Columbia University and the Science History Institute. In addition to twin 3-year-old boys, the beast he keeps at home is a ferocious 12-pound dachshund named Lucille. Mario M. Einaudi is currently the Digital Repository Manager at the Huntington. Reporting directly to the Deputy Director of the Library, he has held this position since 2018, providing leadership in technical planning, implementation, management, and support of digital collections, as well as creating descriptive and technical metadata for non-book and visual collections. He helped set up and establish the Huntington Digital Library, which has a little over 218,000 open access digital objects. Mario holds an MLIS from San Jose State University and an MA from George Washington University in Modern European and Diplomatic History. He has worked in the archives and library field since 1995 and joined the Huntington in 1998. Dana Barsoon has been with us here at the Huntington Library as a special projects photographer since early 2014. He also shares his talents as a freelance photographer covering corporate and private events in the greater Los Angeles area. Dana earned his master's degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Holly Mendenhall is the Digital Projects Manager at the Huntington. Among her many talents, she helps plan, coordinate, and implement in-house digitization efforts. She received her MSIS from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm happy to kick off this presentation officially by surrendering the mic to Dr. Klein.
So thanks for that introduction. And to the organizers for putting together this event. Before turning things over to the team who's responsible for the extraordinary digitization work happening at the Huntington, and you all really are in for a treat today. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the item that we're focusing on today and some of the elements at play when we select items for digitization. So the book we've chosen to focus on is one of my absolute favorites at the Huntington. It's a 1480 first edition of the Dialogus Creaturarum Moralizatus, or Dialogue of Creatures Moralized. So it's a book published at Gouda by Gerard Lew and is relatively rare. There are 40 copies known in holding institutions throughout the world. Our copy was owned at one point by William Morris, the famous textile designer, novelist, and poet who was associated with the British arts and crafts movement. And another earlier owner appears to be the American inventor and builder of railroad machinery, Ross Winans. The book came to the Huntington along with hundreds of other similar 15th century books in large purchases made by Mr. Huntington in the early years of the library. Beyond this, as we'll see, the book had several other fascinating owners. The book itself is a collection of fables featuring a variety of woodcuts depicting anthropomorphized animals, and it's written with a didactic moral intent. The printed book follows in the wake of earlier manuscripts and is closely related to the so-called medieval bestiary genre. These were extraordinary texts on natural history that often had illustrations of animals and imaginary creatures that were generally accompanied by moral lessons. So, for instance, we read of the fox and are told it's a crafty and deceitful animal that never runs in a straight line and disguises itself in mud, plays dead in order to capture prey. And the moral of the story is that the fox is like the devil who pretends to be dead and only reveals himself when he has ensnared worldly sinners in his grasp. So you get the idea. The Dialogus Creaturarum is much the same. My favorite tale and illustration from the book shows an ostrich. So first note that the ostrich has a horseshoe in his or her mouth. And this tells you that this is an ostrich because a common theme of natural history from the ancient world and Middle Ages was that ostriches could swallow and digest iron. But the horseshoe has little to do with the fable, which if we read, we learn that this poor ostrich had two feathers that didn't point in the right direction. So the bird went to a surgeon and asked to have the feathers removed. The surgeon obliged, but after lopping the feathers off, applied an ointment shown in the little bucket there. And this unfortunately had the side effect of making all of the poor animal's feathers fall out. The distraught bird regretted its vanity and wept until it died. A sad cautionary tale indeed. So we were able to digitize this and many other books related to the history of medicine, largely due to a recent gift from Dr. J. Mario Molina. The Huntington is home to one of the largest collections of pre-1501 books or incunabula outside of Europe. And this includes close to 600 items focused upon medicine and early science. So I expect at this point, some of you are asking, but what does this have to do with the history of medicine? Well, the book does have a variety of tales within that concern plants, medicine, and medical practice. But the main reason I selected this particular book for inclusion in the History of Medicine and Allied Sciences section of the Huntington Digital Library is based on what one finds within its margins. So you see there at the bottom of this page, there's a significant amount of handwriting. So in short, a previous owner, likely from the 15th or 16th century, who had beautiful handwriting, added numerous manuscript medical recipes in Latin and English on the pages of this book. So this page, for instance, has two recipes. The first is for treating scalding or burning, and it reads, take a quantity of whey and as much of the white of an egg and as much fresh grease and melt the grease and whey, and it goes on. And the second recipe is titled to do away a web in a man's eye, so perhaps for something like cataracts. These manuscript editions alone are extraordinary and are a priority for digitization. They're even more interesting within the pages of this book of beasts. Other factors beyond provenance and such annotations that we look to when selecting items for digitization include feasibility, so can it be photographed easily? Conservation, does serving an item to readers pose problems for the preservation of the item? How many copies are there? Has it already been digitized? These are just some of the things we think about when making the difficult decision to select from our millions of collection items. With that, I'll say thank you for your attention, and I'll turn things over to Mario Einaudi.
Thank you, Joel, for that introduction and setting the stage so well. As mentioned, I'm Mario Einaudi. I'm the Digital Repository Manager here at the Huntington Library. Like our object of focus this morning, a digital library is in its own way a kind of bestiary, a collection of various digital beasts, often in conversation with each other and with researchers. Later in this talk, my colleague Holly Mendenhall will give voice to some of these conversations. My aim in this part of the talk is to give you a sense of how we lay the groundwork to create these digital objects, these digital beasts. Oops, excuse me, sorry, jumped one. A digital library is first a brief overview of the Huntington Digital Library. It went live in August 2011 after 2 years of planning and development. One can find materials that support each other across 21 different collections, covering topics from photography to manuscripts, the United States Civil War to the Pacific Rim. I apologize, I'm jumping through. That's a mistake on my part. The U.S. Civil War and Pacific Rim, local Southern California history to migration history. At present, the Huntington Digital Library contains more than 218,000 digital objects. A digital object can be either a single item, of which we have 199,543, or a compound object, of which we have 18,483. A compound object is a digital object made of multiple parts, like a letter, a book, a manuscript, or a photograph album. These digital objects are built out of 433,491 digital records. We have a lot of material in our digital library. Full compared to our physical collections. We have over 65,000 albums and photographs and negatives from several major collections, including Southern California Edison, Maynard Parker, and Marquez. There are over 650 rare books and broadsides covering everything from early history of medicine, as Joel was talking about, to Shakespeare to Blake and beyond. There are over 7,500 maps and atlases with strengths in early American maps, the Western Hemisphere, and the United States. There are slightly more than 3,000 manuscripts from journals and diaries to modern letters related to migration to Franklin's autobiography. And there are slightly more than 3,000 manuscripts from journals and diaries to modern letters related to migration to Franklin's autobiography. And the ephemeras, Kemble Maritime Ephemera, J.T. Last Collection, and California Letter Sheets. All these materials have been imaged by our imaging department, which is continuing a long history of photo duplication as a tool capable of deepening research and expanding our research of our holdings. The imaging department's foundations were laid down in the 1920s when one of Huntington's earliest employees, Dr. Ludwig Bendixen, followed Henry Huntington's library from New York to San Marino. Dr. Bendixen served as the head of the Department of Photography and Photographic Reproduction from 1928 until his retirement in 1943. Interested in photographic technology of the time, he pioneered techniques in document copying and forensic photography. Dr. Bendixen was shown there with Benjamin Franklin's ink-stained autobiography, the text of which he was able to make legible using filtered light. Like Dr. Bendixen, the imaging department digital projects team is interested in providing the best facsimiles that we can, only digital, not printed. We want to represent the item as accurately as possible, both structurally and visually. This requires a team from multiple departments, preservation, Acme, imaging, and digital projects, along with our colleagues in curatorial, to create the framework that will enable the objects to be faithfully recreated in digital form, and then to move those digital objects online. The first step after selection, which Joel talked about. So the first step after the selection material is cataloging. Most materials are already cataloged, but this step provides the cataloger or the archivist time to review the catalog record, and more importantly, provide the structural information in the form of shoot lists. These lists or sheets are created using templates established by the digital projects team. Here you can see the first page of the shoot list for the item in today's talk. It's a very good example of why we need these shoot lists. The book was rebound out of order. This is quickly obvious in this shoot list created by Julie Kemper, one of our fantastic rare book catalogers. You can see that the pages begin at 21 after the fly leaves. The introductory matter has been moved to the back of the text following rebinding. In addition to the page order, Julie has added textual clues to aid the photographer in keeping their place while shooting, and us while we load the object and related images into the Huntington Digital Library. These shoot lists are important as well as they aid in the handling of the object during photography. In most cases, it is easier for the photographer to image all the rectos first and then the versos. The shoot list allows for this as the file names and structure have been established ahead of time. Images will fall into order due to the object file name following scanning. All compound objects, objects with 2 or more sides, will have a shoot list built for it. But we also want to represent the item as accurately as we can visually. To that end, and for some time, our imaging department has been using targets, grayscales, color bars, etc., to help calibrate cameras and color correct the images. These are some early examples. We do not crop these out of digital images that go online because they provide valuable information to the users of the digital image and about the digital image, including color, scale, and DPI. Currently, the imaging department is following the federal agency's Department Guidelines Initiative, or FADGI. This is a collaborative effort started more than a decade ago by U.S. federal agencies seeking to communicate common, sustainable practices and guidelines for digitizing historical, archival, and cultural content. In other words, this is an objective set of the best practices and guidelines that can be used to form a technical foundation for digitization activities. A company called Imaging Sciences Associates has created a system based on the FADGI technical foundations called Golden Thread. Looking at the opening page from our Dialogus Creaturarum, we can see the Golden Thread target next to the page. Using Golden Thread and its targets and analysis software, we can, during the digitization process, establish and maintain quality control, determine capture capability of camera and scanning back using device-level targets, ensure consistency in image production using object targets. We can minimize image editing as accuracy happens during the capture process. We can document the imaging process through reports created by Golden Thread's software, and we ensure FADGI standards are being met. In short, this work allows for the consistency of presentation of every image. In using these tools, the shoot lists and the targets, our photographers can create accurate, structurally and visually digital objects, those beautiful images that go into our digital bestiary. I'm going to hand off now to one of our wizards of photography, Dana Barsoon. Thank you for your attention. Dana.
My name is Dana Barsoon, and I've had the pleasure of working here at the Huntington for the past 6 years. In that time, I've had the opportunity to photograph a wide range of materials from the collection, including books, manuscripts, prints, maps, and photographs. In doing so, I've used just about every piece of hardware and software available to the Photo Lab. Here in Imaging Services, we have our studios sectioned off into a variety of bays or workstations designed to work with specific materials in mind. We have a negative scanning station where we photograph 35, 120, and large format film, as well as glass plates and other photographic mediums. We also have 2 flat object stations where we shoot flat material like documents and prints. There's 1 large flat object scanning station where we photograph maps and large printed material. We also have a photo stage for shooting 3-dimensional objects and an oversized easel where we have the ability to photograph large paintings. Which brings us to the star of the presentation, the V Cradle, also known as the backbreaker. The V Cradle was delivered to us in December of 2019. We actually had a gentleman from the UK fly over in January of 2020 to assemble the cradle and teach us how to use and operate it. While I only had a short time to use the cradle before the pandemic hit, I have since been putting a lot of working hours in it, on it for the past 7 months. What makes this unit so unique is that it definitely prioritizes book preservation and image quality over the speed of production. At the end of the day, we at the Huntington would rather take the time to make sure that materials are not harmed through the digitization process. The cradle can accommodate books up to 40 inches by 25 inches, and it is a fully motorized book cradle. It can use a wide range of camera systems, of which we currently use a Phase 1 XF body and an IQ 100 megapixel back. So now the fun part. Let's get into the video. The book cradle has an first I'll demonstrate the various moving parts. The book cradle, located at the bottom portion of your screen, moves vertically up and down to accommodate book size and facilitate proper alignment with the image plane of the camera. Alignment is achieved using a laser, which I will demonstrate later on. In order to achieve the optimal distance from the book, the camera itself also adjusts vertically along what is called the tilt frame. The process of moving the camera up and down helps maximize the amount of resolution that can be achieved with our 100 megapixel back. We currently use 2 dedicated lenses for this setup, an 80 and 120 millimeter lens. Now what you'll see is a side profile of the V Cradle. It is a very adaptable device. The cradle can shoot books and or flat copy. However, for the sake of time, the only flat copy that we would shoot on the cradle will be the front and back covers of any particular book. From shooting flat copy to books, it is necessary to adjust the tilt frame of the V Cradle in order to get the book into its proper positioning. The tilt frame can be set from 0 to 45 degrees. This amount varies from book to book, depending on the size and binding flexibility. The book cradle has an adjustable gap that ensures the book's binding will be properly supported. Once we find the right width, we then lock the 2 tray tables into place. Once the gap is set, we can angle the tray table to allow the book to rest comfortably. The tray table can be set from 180 degrees to 110 degrees, depending on binding flexibility, as well as any conservation concerns. As you can see, the tray table adjusts back and forth to allow proper positioning of the binding throughout the imaging process. We also add felt over the tray tables for imaging purposes, as well as additional binding gap support. As you see me lifting what is referred to as the vacuum arm, this is probably the most important function of the V Cradle, as it allows the book pages to rest parallel with the camera sensor, allowing us to capture distortion-free images. Unique to this design, the vacuum arms hinges freely, meaning that it never locks into place. From a preservation standpoint, this ensures that the vacuum bar will never put forcible pressure on the book itself. Once the book is on the cradle, we once again make sure the book is properly supported. You will see me move the book, adjust the vacuum bar, and pull the cradle towards me. All these adjustments will help give the spine of the book into position so that it can achieve a distortion-free image. This is actually a perspective from the camera itself. Once the book is on the cradle, we once again make sure the book is properly supported. Now I slide the vacuum bar down into position and allow the book to rest on the bar. If you look at the tiny black dots that run horizontally across the lower part of the vacuum bar, these are the vacuum holes that once turned on hold the pages into position while each page is being photographed. The vacuum will be switched on and off after each page so that there's no undue stress put on the material. To get the vacuum suction necessary to hold down each page, we actually cover the holes with construction paper. The construction paper also helps with the audible noise of the section. As like a vacuum cleaner, it can be quite loud. Like the felt that was placed on the tray tables, we place felt over the vacuum bar so that our final image has a consistent look from foreground to background. The felt and construction paper covering the vacuum holes are held into place using magnets. Once the felt is put into place, we can then add our golden thread target, which Mario talked about earlier in his presentation. This is a vital part of our efforts to maintain sharpness, exposure, color consistency from image to image, and more importantly, to ensure we are meeting the FADGI National Archival Standards. Once we have the vacuum bar and golden thread target in place and the pages resting on the vacuum bar, it's time to align the page with the camera. Because the vacuum bar and camera are part of the same tilt frame, by design, they are parallel and always aligned with one another. In theory, then, the part of the page resting on the vacuum bar is considered to be in alignment. Our job, therefore, is to align the inner part of the page closer to the gutter with the outer page of the vacuum bar. To make this possible, the V-Cradle uses a laser alignment tool that can be seen as a flashing red light in the middle left part of your screen. Once the book cradle is adjusted, the precise height the laser can be seen skimming the page. It's going to skim it right there. At this point, we can be rest assured that our final image will be distortion-free and sharp from edge to edge. Once alignment is achieved, it's just a matter of making small adjustments to the page, vacuum arm, and golden thread target to make sure that we are satisfied with the look of the final image. Now that the vacuum bar is in its optimal position, we can tighten down the slide stops on either side of the vacuum. This helps to find the desired placement of the vacuum bar every time we slide it into place. Now I'll take you through a few pages so you can see this process, what this process looks like. You will notice that I check the laser once every page has been placed on the vacuum bar. If the laser is not skimming across the page, then I will adjust the cradle up or down to get the book into proper alignment. And there we are. Once we are ready to start, from this other view, you can see more clearly the pages being brought up into the vacuum bar and the red laser skimming across the page, confirming alignment. You will notice right here that I'll introduce what's called a snake weight. This is used to secure pages from falling or curling into the camera's view while shooting. This is one of many tools that we use to secure books if necessary. Although it really wasn't necessary for this item, I just wanted to kind of show it as an example. All right. Once we're ready to start shooting, we can go ahead. Let's see. Sorry. Once the book has been set up, it's time to start shooting the pages. We always start with the shoot sheet that is provided by Mario and Holly. These help guide us through the imaging process. They especially become invaluable when page numbers are non-existent, and we may have to rely heavily on the object notes that describe the page. To save time and preservation of the book, we shoot all rectos first and versos second. Once we are ready to start shooting, we can go ahead and open up Capture One, which is the editing, this dedicated software that we use for tethering capture, editing, processing of all images. Once we find the folder we already created that corresponds to the call number on the shoot sheet, we can then enter the file object number into the name field. This is always followed by a camera counter, which gives us a reference point in case we are able to make any mistakes along the way. We then click on Live View, which allows us to check for focus and framing in real time. At this point, we adjust the camera horizontally and vertically until the page is centered, and we have as much of the page in the frame as possible. This is all done electronically, so it does take time for the camera to move in the desired direction. Once in place, we can then go to the focus tool to make sure that our images will be sharp. Right there. We now manually focus the lens until we find critical focus. When we are able to start seeing detail in the page, we will see orange highlighted lines at the outer edge of the frame. When these lines converge in the corner, that will indicate that we are now focused. Once focus is achieved, we should not have to refocus until we are finished with the entire book. Occasionally, we may have to raise or lower the cradle as seen in the demonstration, but as long as we can see the red laser skimming the page, we can be rest assured that the image will be in focus. Now we can make sure that we have the correct file object number inputted into Capture One, and we can take the shot. Once the image renders in Capture One, we can make minor cropping or exposure adjustments necessary. Any changes that we make here will be applied to the next image capture, so you don't have to make the same adjustments twice. And then once we are ready, we can move on to shooting the next recto page. We'll line it up again. Make sure we're in focus. Once again, make sure that we have the right object file name. And take another shot. And both are in exactly the same position. Once we are done shooting, we will then go ahead and transfer all images over to our workstations, where we do any post-production that is necessary before the images are sent off for review and final check. The first observation we make once the images have been loaded into Capture One is in the upper right part of the screen. We will make sure that the total number of images captured matches the number of images listed on the shoot sheet provided, in this case, 223. When we pull the images into Capture One, we will have the images set sort by name. This will give us the opportunity to do a visual side-by-side check of each and every spread, making sure they're all in order, that there are no duplicates and/or missing pages. Now we will show you a few ways in which the golden thread target talked about earlier is used in post-production to achieve exposure accuracy and check for sharpness. One of the benefits of Capture One is that it works in coordination with golden thread by coming preloaded with LAB color space readout technology that measures reflective and transmissive objects as a number between 1 and 100, with 1 being pure black and 100 being pure white. If you look directly above the document window, there's where the cursor is, you will see a number values in white, magenta, and yellow. These are the LAB readout values for whatever the mouse cursor is currently hovering over. In this case, it is black felt, which is reading 5.97 out of 100. So basically black with a little bit of detail. We will now take a look at the golden thread target and the corresponding LAB white point targets. We will zoom in and you will notice that the next whitest square there is a number that reads 95.4. This number is our benchmark for the highest value of white in the image. Without getting too deep into the explanation of these values, just know that our goal is to get these values to match the white LAB number in the upper part of the document screen. Once these numbers are relatively close, then we are within a range that is acceptable. If anything, we like the value to be a little bit under. While adjusting exposure, we are simultaneously checking for sharpness. If we cannot see the golden thread target clearly or notice that it looks a little bit blurry, then we know focus has been compromised and we would have to go back and reshoot. While this does happen, it's always good practice while shooting to check for focus every 10 images or so. And that's basically it. Once we have finished editing all images in the folders, we then process the images and send them off for review to Holly, which I will now pass the mic to now.
Thank you, Dana. I'm sure our audience shares my absolute awe for that amazing video of your process. Let me get my slides up. As mentioned earlier, my name is Holly Mendenhall, and I'm the digital projects manager for the library. And my job would be basically next to impossible without the work our talented photographers produce. So in this portion of the webinar, I'd like to just briefly touch on how the files produced by Dana and his colleagues become compound objects on the HDL. And then also, if we have time, demonstrate some features of that platform before we open the discussion to questions. So once a photographer is done shooting an object, they'll process the raw files and provide low resolution JPEGs on a network drive. I'll check these images once more for consistency and ensure nothing is missing or out of place. And once the proofs are approved, the photographer then generates archival TIFFs and high resolution JPEGs. The former, the TIFFs, will be ingested into our digital preservation archive. And they live there until disaster happens. And the latter, the high resolution JPEGs, are what we feed into the Huntington Digital Library. That said, one simply does not upload images into the HDL without identifying metadata. We must correlate the descriptive metadata generated by the cataloging team, so info about the object, to the images. While we also have to consider wrangling technical and administrative metadata, so info about the files and the photography. This process is a little more complex than I really have time to address here, but in short, metadata is exported from a template into a form usable by our digital repository software, which is Content DM. The images and metadata are finally packaged together as a compound object and uploaded, which results in the digital object that's now available on the HDL. All of this work is undertaken to bring the Huntington's library collections beyond the reading room and into a realm that is accessible at all hours from all corners of the world. So using this item, I'm going to switch to a live demo and quickly show some of these features that our digital repository has and ways we can create new dialogues with other digital collections. So bear with me while I pause and switch. Okay, so we're in the browser now, and you can see the dialogus in the HDL. You can find sort of the usual embedded page navigation and cataloging information of the object, and then each single page has additional information. I can minimize this and make the screen a little bit more visible. I can click on this expansion item icon, and you can pan and zoom out of a single selected image, and we can really see how Dana's manual focus has paid off here. I'm zoomed in far closer than you would ever be able to get in the reading room.
Hey, Holly, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm still seeing your screenshot, not your browser.
No. Thank you.
Yep.
There we go. Okay, here we go. Here it is on the HDL. Most of you should probably be familiar with this sort of interface by now. We've got pages. What I was showing you before is how you can use this expansion item icon just to view a single page. And this is where we were singing Dana's praises, getting in real close to the sun. But I can also download images for most of our items on the HDL. And this book in particular makes some great coloring book opportunities. So you can download and print this out for your kids if you wanted, or yourself, stress relief. What I really want to show you is this feature in these 3 columns. It's a stylized M icon. If you click this, it's going to take you to a new workspace, the Mirador viewer, which is an open source IIIF compliant image viewing platform that the Huntington has added to our digital library, Content DM. But you can test it out on your own completely for free if you go to projectmirador.org. And as is readily apparent, I can more easily see all pages of the book at once, and from this carousel down at the bottom, I can change the viewing options, get a good view of all of the pages at once again. I can do a 2-up book view, much like Dana was showing for his review process. But one of the best features, let's see, is the way that Mirador allows us to create dialogues with other collections and other materials, and we can look at more than just one page at a time. So for this purpose, I'm going to navigate to one of my favorite images in the book. It's a story of a wolf and a donkey, which may sound like Aesop to some of you, but this one's a little bit different. I'm going to switch to a single page. Here we go. So in this story, we've got a wolf and a donkey, and they are striving to saw a plank together. And the wolf is going to be a wolf, and he's got some malicious intent, desperate to find a way to eat his colleague. The wolf starts a fight with the donkey and says that the donkey was intentionally throwing sawdust into his eyes. And the donkey, ever gracious, offers to switch places with the wolf, but the wolf is stubborn, refuses, and instead decides to antagonize the donkey by blowing sawdust up at the donkey. Gravity does its thing and causes dust to fall down into the wolf's eyes. Enraged, the wolf attempts to knock this precarious scaffolding down and gets knocked out by the plank, which easily brings to mind the old maxim that what goes around comes around. As Joel mentioned, this book represents the first printed collection of these fables, and it was an endeavor undertaken by Gerard Lew in 1480. This book was so popular, though, that he was able to print many further editions, including a Dutch version. This version that we're looking at right now is in Latin. And we're fortunate enough to have in the Huntington Collections and Digital Library this 1482 Dutch version. So I've preloaded that. Here it is in the HDL. But I'd like to see if this later edition used the same woodcut. And if it did, how does it compare? Which would be, a little bit tedious if I manually had to go through each page to find this woodcut. But thankfully, Mirador, through the magic of IIIF, will let us compare them next to each other. And I've covered this topic pretty extensively in previous webinars, and I did see a question come up about it. I'm not going to overdo IIIF here, but our images are IIIF compliant, and that means that you can take our images and put them elsewhere. I recommend checking out the library research guides that cover IIIF and the HDL too. And for those of you who don't know what IIIF is, it is the International Image Interoperability Framework, a mouthful. It's a global community that shares the goal of enabling flexible, persistent access to image-based resources. And the community has established a framework of standards that relies on interoperable technology, which allows archives, libraries, museums to readily share their materials via the same platform. And for those of you who may have been doing this work about 20 years ago, that was a very difficult endeavor. Everyone was reinventing the wheel. And what makes it so special that an image is IIIF compliant is that it can be manifested into a source agnostic workspace, which just means that an image can be stored and hosted by one repository, like the HDL, and invoked in a completely different workspace. So let's go and see how we can compare these two editions using Mirador. If I go back to the HDL record for the 1482 Dutch book, right in the record, you can see this IIIF manifest link. We're just going to copy that. If you clicked on this, it's just going to be the text of a JSON file. And this is not of a whole lot of use to us in this presentation. So I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to add a slot. I don't want left, I actually want right. And I'm going to paste the URL that I just copied, and I'm going to load that. And there it is, it populates. I'm going to click and select that as my second item. And I'm going to find our wolf and donkey. We can already see that Lou is still using the same type just 2 years later, but this is obviously in Dutch. But I really want to show you the woodcut. Just took a minute. There we go. So zooming out, minimize these, we can see that the 1480 copy was maybe a little bit more well-loved by its previous owners with all of the manuscript annotations. But the woodcut looks pretty true to what he was using in 1480, if not a little degraded. But we can also invoke IIIF compliant images from other digital repositories using the same process that we just did to compare these two HDL items. I was able to find an earlier manuscript version located in a Swiss collection and digitized by the eCodices project. I'll show you that website here. Here's the item. And you can again see this IIIF manifest URL. Each digital repository has a different way of indicating whether or not they are IIIF compliant. But this right here makes it really easy to tell and copy that link address. So I'm going to go back to my Mirador page and I'm going to add another slot. And I'm going to add this new item, really simple. Paste that in. Hope it loads a little bit faster. And we're going to go to folio 156. Thanks for bearing with me, everyone. And we can compare this earlier edition, which is a Latin manuscript. We can see lupus right here. And we'll compare that with the printed text. And we could use this to determine, variation. We could translate between the Dutch and the Latin. The possibilities are really just endless. And to that end, this sort of dialogue between digital collections, it's really only possible as a result of the faithful reproduction that our photographers and photographers at other cultural heritage institutions are creating. And this sort of work is really crucial to the Huntington Library's mission to share our collections and engage with a global community. This dialogue between books wouldn't be possible. You can't just pick up a book from a library and fly it across the world and compare them. So we're really pleased to have such a dedicated endeavor to making all of this open. So without further ado, I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. I'll hand it off to Anne.
Hi, everyone. We'll begin the question and answer period of our session before we wrap up in a couple minutes. I wanted to mention that a few questions were answered via text. A couple questions came in about wearing gloves, and a attendee named Bridget posted a link to the Smithsonian's blog about glove wearing if you'd like to learn more. And generally, when handling rare books or paper objects, wearing gloves reduces your tactility and dexterity with your fingertips. They could lead to accidental damage. So we generally don't recommend using gloves when handling rare books, and clean hands are preferable. Let's see, since we got a question here for, it looks like Dana, since a lot of care is needed for setting up pages, how many pages per hour are photographed once the basic setups are finished?
Yeah, it varies from book to book. There's some books where, you might only get through like, 30, 40 pages a day if there's not a lot of binding flexibility. But in the case of this book where everything was just fine, you could probably do about, I would say, anywhere between 80 and 130 pages per day, because you also have to take in consideration time to do post-production and whatnot. I've only really had the opportunity to use the V Cradle since September, and I'm only working currently half days in the Huntington because of home Zoom school life. So I haven't had a chance to use it like a full day, but I would say 80 to 120 images depending on the book.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dana. Maybe this is a question for Mario. How do you protect against hacking and other threats to the database, the digital library?
Well, we actually are hosted by OCLC. So our digital library is run by Content DM, which is hosted by OCLC. And so they're the ones who take care of that end of the security issues. I do know that one of the things that they do is they have multiple backups in several different locations around the world. So if one site should be corrupted, they can go to a second site and shut down the first site that was corrupted.
Great, thank you, Mario. Another question for Mario and Holly. How do you describe books that are part of a set or collection? In other words, metadata beyond the individual object.
Go ahead, Mario.
It depends on what the item is. We do have a field called part of object, so that if it's part of a greater grouping of materials, that's one place where the information can go. There is also, if it's a multiple part, say volumes, the volume number is included in the call number. So you'll know you're in volume 1 or volume 2 or volume 3 of something. It really just depends on the material and how we handle it. In the digital library, we try to treat items as individuals. So you wouldn't necessarily group like a 5-volume book together in a single record, because that would actually make it enormous. If you can imagine, say, 3 books that are each 500 pages, you would then have an object that is, I don't know, 1,500 pages in length. So it's huge. And so you want to treat them separately. So there are different ways that we can link them. Holly, if you have anything you'd like to add?
The only other thing I'd like to add, I guess, is that IIIF in creating manifests are one way of organizing the materials that can be outside of maybe the order that they were shot in or things like that. So there are opportunities to sort of create external manifests where you could put all the various volumes together. But that's sort of an advanced next level feature.
Thanks so much, Holly and Mario, for answering that. We got a question from an MLIS student interested in working in digitization. Are there any classes or specific skills software you would recommend?
I mean, yeah, definitely. We use Capture One, and that's we use that for tethering and for editing and processing. And there are actually a lot of classes around. I know, I believe it's called Digital Transitions. They offer classes, and they also. I was actually before I worked at the Huntington, I worked as a digital tech. On like fashion shoots and stuff like that, and I actually got I actually had taken some classes in Capture One and use of like phase 1 cameras and stuff, and so I had been certified as what was called a phase 1 digital tech, and I know that we've actually attended some of those classes here at the Huntington as well. So maybe look for some of those certification classes.
I was going to second DT Digitization 101 too. And also there are some, if your coursework doesn't include it, you could also, of course, take a Library Juice Academy. They have a whole series of classes that are really good. And also, if you're not working with very old material, you'll really want to get yourself acquainted with rights, copyright, and such. It's a complicated field.
Very
Just a quick
important.
plug too for Rare Book School, which occasionally has courses on digitization and digital humanities projects.
Okay, we got an interesting question from a medievalist. Dana, you said the V Cradle is named the backbreaker. Care to say more? Context, I'm a medievalist interested in scribes mentioning how hard writing is on their bodies.
Well, in this case, the machine, I mean, it's very hard to kind of reach over and, you know, take the book on and off. A lot of times you have to actually swing around to one side or the other to actually move the item. And so I've heard in the past, actually, you know, from other locations that have the V Cradle, that it's been known as being called the backbreaker. But in my case, I haven't had that happen to me. But I would say that I would actually call it the concussion bucket, because when I have it like when I'm shooting flat copy, if it's too short, sometimes I can actually go right into it with my head, and I've actually got a couple of bruises before from just nailing it, you know, head on at full speed. So, you know, for me, it's called the concussion bucket.
And let's take one last question. We're right at 11:05, so we ran over a bit. Is the golden thread system only for written objects, or can you use it with for paintings and other artworks?
You can use it, Dana, if you want
You
to.
go right ahead, Mario.
Oh, no, I was going to say you can use it. That's the design of the system, is so that it can be used for multiple different materials, not just written materials. It's a very, very flexible and a very good system.
Yeah, the only caveat is that you have to make sure that whatever you're photographing, the golden thread has to be on the same plane as whatever you're photographing, so that both items are flat. So, for example, if you were photographing a book on a flat table, you would have to build up the golden thread to a point where it was even with the page that you were photographing. Otherwise, it's really hard to tell if anything is, you know, obviously sharp, or if the color is right. So.
Okay, we've run a bit over, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. We will post a recording online, and we encourage you to share it with friends and colleagues who might be interested in learning more about the digitization process and the life cycle of digital images once they've been digitized. So I will be signing off. And if you did submit a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it live, we'll follow up with you via the email you registered with. Take care, everyone. Thanks for coming.